Tarta de Saintiago, a traditional flourless almond cake from Spain. We're going to change the recipe up a little bit from the traditional recipe in that we're going to separate the yolks from the whites, and we'll beat the whites into soft peaks and fold them into the flour and yolk mixture. You can forego this, however, and just beat the egg whites, yolks, and the almond flour together, which is closer to what the original recipe would be. As you see, I'm using the 3-bowl method of separating the yolks from the whites. That way you ensure that you don't have a mistake and ruin your whites with a burst egg yolk. This recipe serves 8. It's a simple cake to make, and I've had very good responses from people who are not on a low carb diet to this cake. They find it delicious and they don't miss the sugar at all. Xylitol is a 1-to-1 replacement for sugar in this recipe, and you want to make sure that you get the xylitol that's made from real birch or birch bark. I find it takes actually a little bit less xylitol than it does sugar, which is a good thing since xylitol is $30 for 5 pounds. This recipe only requires the zest of 1 orange and 1 lemon for flavor, and it's quite incredible. We're going to use the zested orange later in a compote that we're going to make to go on top. Of course, when you try to squeeze lemon juice into anything without using a screen, you'll always get a pit, no matter how hard you try not to. I'm adding a dash of this orange liqueur to the batter. I think it gives it a nice little punch, but it's not part of the original recipe. It's purely an option. I further modified the recipe by adding a 1/4 cup of olive oil to help keep the cake nice and moist. The traditional recipe uses ground almonds, but I'm using almond meal, and in this particular recipe, because I had it, I put a little bit of hazelnut filberts. You can feel free, I think, to crush up some walnut or some pecan and put in the cake if you'd like to. If any of you are familiar with making souffles, then the idea of beating the egg whites till they form soft peaks and then folding them into the cake as a leavening agent is something you'll be familiar with, but also the cake will settle once it comes out of the oven as well, but still it'll be much lighter than if you just beat the yolks and whites together as in the traditional recipe. I added a 1/2 teaspoon of cream of tartar to the egg whites to help stabilize them for when we fold them into the batter. Just work the egg whites in a little at a time. The more you add, the easier it'll be to mix the remaining in. It's really not all that difficult, just takes a little bit of patience. You want to just gently fold the egg whites in without being too rough on them. The remaining of this video, I've got it sped up. It looks like I'm really whipping them in there, but I'm not. I'm gently folding them in as I'm doing right here. I like to try to keep my videos 10 minutes or less, so That often means cutting things out or speeding things up to accomplish that. The end result should be a nice, smooth, pourable batter. I was lazy and used cooking spray to coat the cake pan with, and I won't do that again. I had some sticking issues. It's just much better just to smear butter around on the inside of the cake pan, and you won't have any issues with the sides sticking. We're going to bake this cake at 350 degrees for 40 minutes or so. While the cake is baking, we're going to go ahead and make our orange compote topping. And while this would qualify as low carb, it's not strictly keto because it does have the fructose of the oranges in it. However, we're not using any sugar. Again, we'll be sweetening this with xylitol. Each slice of cake only gets a little dollop anyway. It's simply not a whole lot of carbohydrates or fructose. And of course, again, this is just purely optional. It's not necessary, but I just hate to waste an orange. We'll be using the flesh of the orange that we took the zest from to make the cake, and then we're going to zest another orange and use this flesh as well. So there's the flesh of 2 oranges and the zest of 1 orange in this little compote that we're making. We're going to add just a little bit of salt to this, even though it is a sweet concoction. The salt is a flavor enhancer, and you won't taste the salt, but it will actually enhance the flavor of the oranges and the sweetness of the orange. Over relatively high heat, we're going to add a little bit of water and then some orange liqueur, and we're simply just going to cook this down until it's basically an orange mush. We're going to squeeze in a little bit of lemon to enhance the flavor as well, and just cook it down again until we make a nice orange compote. Add water as necessary, and just continue to simmer it until it takes on a soft appearance like this with no discernible cell structure. Because there's no sugar in this compote to form a syrup and thus give it body, we're going to use butter, and we're just simply going to beat it in off the heat, and that'll give it body, and it'll also add another dimension to the flavor. Nice. Now we just kind of let it cool, and we'll apply the topping. As you see, this cake has settled somewhat since it's cooled down, but nothing to worry about. It's still quite nice. Embellishing the cake with a cross of St. James is traditional for Tarta de Saintiago. And while not necessary, it does make a nice traditional presentation. I drew this one on the bottom of a paper plate and then cut it out to use as a template. We're dusting the cake with a product called Swerve. I guess that's how you pronounce it. It's basically, I think, powdered xylitol, but it's really quite good. It has a nice pop when you bite into it. Well, there you have it. Tarta de Saintiago. For the complete recipe as well as other videos and recipes, please check out my website at cheftylermacon.com. Thank you very much.